Thank you everyone for joining. I'm Andrea Woodard with the Greater Des Moines Partnership, and I think if you haven't already, can put yourself outside of our speakers, put yourself on mute, and then use the chat function to send in any questions. I'll introduce our speakers here in a minute, but also, do feel free to send questions to my email at awoodard@dsmpartnership.com or ryanmoon@dsmpartnership.com. We are going to dive right in today to our kind of panel discussion on the 2020 elections and what kind of impacts we're seeing because of COVID-19, and hopefully provide an opportunity to guests to hear about how those are being addressed and what to expect over not just the next month, but leading into even the general election in November. So our format will be to go from speaker to speaker for a little bit, and then we'll have some questions for the group. And with that, I'll just welcome each of our speakers. We have Secretary of State Paul Pate, Polk County Auditor Jamie Fitzgerald, and Dallas County Auditor Julia Helm. We'll turn it over first to Secretary Pate. And Secretary, I don't know if you may not remember, but in I want to say 2002, 2003-ish, I was on your Mayor's Youth Council in Cedar Rapids. I was the representative for Cedar Rapids Prairie. So do you recall some meetings up at
Yes.
City Hall when you were mayor in Cedar Rapids? So Secretary Pate served actually the first time as Secretary of State from 1995 to 1999, and then was elected again in 2014. As I mentioned, in between there was mayor of Cedar Rapids from 2002 to 2006. And we're going to start with you, and then I'll introduce each of our speakers between, but if you can, start by giving us kind of an overview of the upcoming elections from a statewide perspective and how we're adapting those to the current situation with COVID-19. Take it away.
Well, thank you for hosting this, and you've got a good panel here. I'm sure we can answer most of the tough questions. If not, we'll put it out to some of the other auditors. Collectively, I think we got this under control. But I will just say up front, this whole COVID-19 is something that's beyond any experience most of us have ever had. We are risk managers in the election field. Typically, though, it's more about tornadoes or bad pipes bursting and having to move a polling site or things of that nature. This is clearly a much larger scale, and we've had to adapt and plan accordingly. And for those of you out there who think elections just kind of happen overnight, I would tell you that that's far from how it works. There are months and months of planning that goes into these things. You just don't get the ballots printed in 5 minutes. You have to determine a lot of details as to how many you think you'll need, and you talk about ordering envelopes and other stock items. It's something that has to be planned as early as possible. And when this COVID came on us, we were back in March then trying to figure out what's going to happen. Will we be able to have any kind of thing close to a normal election? You had some talking about, oh, we'll cancel the primaries. And that's the last thing I think any of us wanted to do. So having said that, we had to collectively come up with a game plan. And the logical one was to build off our strengths. In Iowa, our voters have chose to like to have a choice, whether they vote in person, absentee, whether they will vote curbside, or they will vote at the auditor's offices. And fortunately for us, we have a very good absentee program in Iowa, and we could lean on that. And that was the decision we made early on. And my office decided we needed to be very aggressive on that front because we were trying to avoid putting people at the polling places, not knowing where we'd be at by June. And we didn't want to expose our poll workers to any unnecessary challenges or problems. And we didn't want voters to have that problem. And sometimes it's perception as well as reality. So having said all that, the absentee was our plan, and we sent out that statewide mailing to everybody, the absentee ballot request. Many of the counties stepped up and did their own as well. So the voters were getting more than one opportunity, if you will. And I think that's what has demonstrated a lot of success here. And we've seen record numbers. We're probably near about 400,000 absentee ballot requests by the end of the week. That's significant, and for a primary particularly, when you really, primaries are probably anywhere around 30 to 40,000 typically in an election. So I think that's working well. and I will go into more details later. I'll let some of the auditors chime in. But having said that, now we're making sure that we're working on the other pieces of this, sure that at the polling sites we are safe and ready. And I can say that we've had good partnerships with our National Guard and many other agencies, whether they're federal and state. So we've been able to get a lot of the products and supplies to the counties, whether it's hand sanitizer, face masks, things of that nature, so that poll workers can be safe and also give the voters a safe voting environment. Those are all good things. In fact, the National Guard's delivering those items this week. And I want to thank the auditors for everything they're doing, because they're the ones that still have to make sure the polling sites work and that they have the poll workers and that all these mechanics fit and were successful.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to turn it next to our Polk County Auditor, Jamie Fitzgerald. And as it turns out, so I live in Polk County, and Ryan make up the policy team, and he's in Dallas. So we've got both Julia and Jamie covered. Jamie was reelected in 2018 for your fourth term, I believe.
2016. 2016.
Okay. Well, thank you for the clarification. And if you can talk to us a little bit about, what you're doing, but also provide that urban flavor, and then we'll kind of hear from Julie on more of the rural area. Not that there aren't some rural areas of Polk County, but I'll let you take it away, Jamie.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate being with Secretary Pate, Auditor Helm, and your membership. It has been a trying time. The Secretary of State's leadership with sending out absentee ballot requests has helped alleviate a lot of issues. If you remember back in March when this first happened, we had a lot of states going for the Democratic primaries and primaries in general, but most notably was Wisconsin, where they had some legal wrangling, some politics involved, and they started out with 180 precincts in Milwaukee, and they ended up with 5. And the reason they ended up with 5 was because the poll workers were quitting, polling sites were saying you can't come in. So right after that, we started calling our polling sites, trying to figure out where we're going to go. Historic polling sites for us, we knew we weren't going to be in, whether it was Wesley Acres or Central Presbyterian Church. They were pretty adamant that we weren't going to be in there. And the senior living places, we definitely understand that. So a lot of times, poll workers and our office aren't in public buildings. The schools have a whole different process than the old days when we used to just go to schools and vote there. They have new security measures. So it's harder and harder for us to get into schools. And with the Secretary of State's help and the governor's help, we're actually in more high schools now than we have been since probably 2000, which they'll be closed and opened up. But we're down to 2 non-government buildings right now. We reduced our polling sites from 135 locations down to 28. It's not ideal, but it's the reality is we think we can staff those. And the Secretary of State didn't mention his second push was to get poll workers. And we've seen some success on that. Some people think they're going to be hired full time. They understand what a poll worker is, but that's okay. It's been very helpful to us. But we've been in constant contact with our poll workers. I'm of the fruition that if a poll worker, is just because they're a little older and maybe more vulnerable, if they want to work, they're going to be allowed to work. But we are preparing that a bunch of them will quit the day before, or at least say maybe not for us. So we're already starting that process, along with how are we going to make sure that our voters are safe. We're talking about stuff socially distancing. We're going to do the best we can, but when you have 135 locations for 177 precincts, you're not going to be able to socially distance. A lot of these places are small churches, small government facilities. So we're going to be in a lot of high schools. And, like I said, it's not ideal, but we're not in ideal times. The one thing we want to make sure is that everybody has the opportunity to vote, whether it's by mail, in our office, or at the polling sites. But our main focus is, and with the Secretary's help, to make sure that our poll workers and our voters are safe as possible.
Thanks, Jamie. And next, I would like to turn it to Dallas County Auditor Julia Helm. And Julia, you were elected in 2016, so right?
Right, right.
Get my facts straight here. So if you can, yeah, talk a little bit about what you're doing and particularly how it might be a little bit different in the rural area of our state. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. And I echo what Auditor Fitzgerald said. Secretary of State, your push for the vote at home has been instrumental, I think, in getting the ball rolling for people thinking about elections. Dallas County, we have 34 precincts, and we will be taking ours down to 8 regional temporary polling locations, and that will serve both the urban part of Dallas County and then the rural part. We will combine township precincts into regions, so our voters won't have to travel out of their region to vote. And I am following Auditor Fitzgerald. We're going to have PPE. We're going to social distance as much as possible. We've secured some of larger locations to help do the social distancing. Each voter will have their own pin. So they will get their pin that they will vote their ballot, and then just drop it off on their way out of the polling location. And we'll have PPE for the precinct election workers, masks, hand sanitizers, gloves, shields, etc. Everything we could get for them. I think I still have a worry about my workers. Secretary Pate did help us recruit, and that was awesome, but the matriculation into our training program, I'm still shaking some bushes so we can fully staff those precincts that we have set up. And for, like I said, the rural, we have actually a few extra precincts in the rural to help with the distance of traveling for them.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we will start with just a couple of questions I know we have prepared, and one of them I actually kind of tossed to you all as we were kicking off the event itself. Can you talk a little bit about budgets, how you've had to shift things around, how your budgets have been impacted during this time, and what maybe to expect throughout the rest of the year too, with the legislature going back? Will we see a need for additional funds, or are they just being moved to different priorities? Can someone want to talk about that?
I'll a little bit with the federal government. With the recent bill they passed, there was funding that was sent our way based on a match, 20% match. And that has enabled us to be able to do a lot of the things we're doing right now, to be able to underwrite getting some of these safety products and supplies to the counties, and some funding to help with the poll locations, whether it's to help sanitize the sites or some other item the auditors deem necessary for that. And then to help underwrite the costs of the absentee ballot request forms and the postage for those. We were able to secure a federal grant for that. That grant is for the general election as well. So we will be looking to that source for anything we might need come this fall. And we'll be reviewing how this primary goes and identifying what's working best and what might need some improvements. And with those things factored in from the input the auditors share with us, we'll be able to better identify how we're going to prioritize whatever federal money is left for the fall election. But to be fair about it, and I'm sure the auditors will chime here in a moment, the real cost of elections is felt by the county government, because they're the ones that have to put the poll workers in the field and deal with getting the ballots mailed out, so they can better speak to the costs they're incurring.
Julia,
Jamie, have anything to add?
I can start. Yes, our budget, we didn't plan for 10,000 ballots, obviously, and so our postage and mailing and ballot purchase have gone up, but and also the purchase of the PPE, which is great that we'll have that grant, those grant dollars through the Secretary of State to help us with that. But we are able to shift some dollars from not hiring. Normally I would hire over 200 poll workers for this. I will be able to shift some of those funds to cover mailing, and we will be sending out a household mailing to tell voters where they are going, their optional voting location. With shrinking from 34 to 8, we felt like we needed to notify voters at their homes about what was happening.
And we've sent out the householded mailer already. We did household it. It makes financial sense for us. But that was something we didn't build in. You know, the other stuff that we didn't foresee was when you start looking at the amount of absentees that you have in terms of envelopes, your postage meter. So this has been a very successful program the Secretary's put together. You know, really, primaries are candidate driven. You know, the parties aren't involved. You're not getting mailers from Chuck Grassley or Cindy Axney or any of the candidates. Usually it is a candidate driven, low turnout election. I mean, our highest turnout was in 2018 on the Democratic side when it seemed like everybody from Des Moines was running for governor. And in 2010, the Republican side had the highest turnout when Governor Branstad came back to run. So, you know, they're really candidate driven. And what we're seeing with this is a lot of people that normally don't vote. You know, we're spending a little bit more on, in terms of educating voters. You know, normally we don't do a lot with no party voters because you have to be a registered Democrat or Republican to participate. And this mailer went to everybody, rightfully so. But some of the folks, one, don't like the rules. And two, you know, need a little more, you know, hey, this is an opportunity. This isn't a, you have to do it. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican, but to participate in this, they're picking their nominees. So that's caused a little bit of heartburn for some folks. You know, we're dealing with the same thing that Secretary Pate and Julie are dealing with. Everyone thinking their information is being stolen. These forms have been out there, I mean, since probably 2004. Everyone gets sent the same form. This is one of the first times we actually heard complaints about it. But we've just asked people, just flip it over, put a piece of paper over it, and don't use construction grade tape. And please don't super glue it. That's extremely hard to get off. One of the other things we did spend money on that we never have in the past was automatic mail openers. So high-speed mail openers, we normally open everything by hand. Ryan worked for me a number of years ago, and one of his jobs was to get the old, you know, mail opener and open up stuff. So that's helped us transition to actually trying to be a little bit bigger county. With the amount of mail we're getting, we're over 50,000 requests. Our highest number of requests returned on the Democratic side was 6,300. On the Republican side, it was 2,700. We're already almost to 10,000 right now, and that number is not going down. So we think we're actually expanding the universe, and not just those people that want to vote. We're allowing everyone to kind of be part of the process, and that's a good thing. So hats off to Secretary Pate for pulling the trigger on sending the mailer out to everybody. The one thing that we did a little bit differently is we're having to hire more part-time people than years past. Usually this is a 1 or 2 part-timers. Right now we have 15 because there's a little more to going into the ballots. When you get them, you get the request, there's some data entry, then there's putting the envelopes together, putting the stickers on, and getting them out the door. So there's a little bit more work than what a lot of people that work in the campaign world think there actually is. And to turn around in 24 hours, we come in early. We've worked every weekend since the mailer hit, and we're glad to do that. We just want people to be safe and secure when they vote.
I definitely hope that this can be a discussion, so any of our other panelists jump in at any point here. We do have a few questions from our participants, and the first one is, will the opening hours of, or I suppose opening or closing hours of polling places be shortened? Can you talk about any changes, or and maybe why or why not? What for some historical knowledge, where you all see that going?
No, we won't be doing that at this time. You know, again, our goal was to encourage as many people as possible to take advantage of the early voting through absentee balloting. And the numbers we're seeing, that's clearly happening. If the people who are requesting actually do submit their ballots, So we should have a lot smaller number coming out to the polling places. We want that process to be as safe as possible. We don't want lines, and we don't want people, rephrase that. We want people to use safe distancing as much as we can. And so the polling hours will still be the same.
Excellent, thank you.
Peaks and valleys. You know, it's always a peak when you're on your way to work, even though a lot of people are working from home. 8 o'clock is going to be a peak, noon, 5. Then for some reason, 8:59 is always a peak as well.
Yeah. If we could get voters to kind of think about their day and maybe do an off time would really help the poll workers too. There'll be a skeleton, well, for Dallas County for sure, there'll be skeleton crews in those polling locations. So just think through your day and think about an off time to go.
Makes sense. So our next question here is, do you think mailing absentee ballots or requests will be a new normal for future elections? And maybe that's a good time too to ask about the general and some of the considerations you all have going through your minds right now as we lead into November and knowing there's a lot of uncertainty right now.
Well, I think, you know, Jamie mentioned this earlier. In a primary, the parties don't get as actively involved in the absentee effort. That makes a dramatic difference. So primaries have tended to always be a lower turnout. And obviously it's also focused on a very tight audience, you know, Republicans to Republicans and Democrats to Democrats. And probably in fairness, the no party people don't get much attention. But when you go to the general election, it's a whole other game. You've got the candidates who drive the turnout. And most of us, we get a little tired of all the mailings and we get a lot of absentee ballot requests from different people. So I don't know if it's as crucial then as it was for the primary, but clearly we also just have to monitor where this COVID-19 is at and how it's going to be looking in the fall as well, because our goal here wasn't just about voter turnout. It was about safety for the voter, poll worker, and to make sure Americans and Iowans knew that their vote was important, and we wanted to make sure they knew that they have total access to getting that done.
You know, some of the hard part is once you start doing something, it's hard to tell people you're stopping. So we don't know if this is going to be the new normal for a government sending it out. But I will say, as a guy that's watched this for a number of years, even during the general elections, very few people do postage paid on the way back. And that seems to, that along with it coming from government, I think people a little more, feel a little safer about sending it in. And so, you know, it's one of those things where it'd be nice if we had the money to do it again. You know, but one of the things we'd ask is if we're going to do it again, we send it out a little earlier. You know, and that's no knock on Secretary Pate. I mean, he was doing a lot of this on the run, but you know, once you start doing anything in government or anything at home, then it starts to be one of those things where people expect it, and they'll start calling and asking where their ballot request is.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So one of our next questions here, and I think you might have covered it in terms of numbers that you're seeing, numbers that you're on the requests and what you're getting in the mail in terms of ballots, but where do you see that then maybe going for the presidential election, or is it just too soon to be able to predict at this point?
Dallas normally has high voter turnout for generals. I mean, we had already anticipated that we would be in the 40th percentile of absentee requests, but now we're thinking maybe even 45% of our registered voters.
If I could chime in, because Julia, you talked about this. Dallas is one of our lead counties in the state when it comes to the general elections for absentee. I mean, they pretty much broke the glass ceiling every time I look at election results. I also think we have to kind of watch and see how this works on the long term, because COVID-19 has put us all in a different mindset. We're looking at the fact that many of us are in our homes. We're not working in our traditional workplace. We are focusing in on the COVID and how it's impacting us, whether it's our jobs, our families, our lives. We're looking at how government's responding to it. I just suspect there's a lot of that is playing a role in why people are stepping up and making sure they're voting this time. And some of that will be sorted out, as I said, as we watch the results as they come in and down the road. This is definitely a unique scenario for all of us in the elections arena. And as I said, we hope for the best, but we have to plan for the worst. And that's part of what Jamie said. Yeah, some of this is being done on the run, but I can tell you it's, fortunately, we've spent a lot of time building a strong base of what to do when things happen. We just never had a chance to test it, and now we are.
And we're seeing, nationwide, we're seeing a big push for all mail ballots. That's been a push, whether it's in Utah, Oregon, where they started. So we get a lot of questions on that. But right now, the key is, getting the absentees in that we have. Right now, we have 27% of all registered Democrats have a ballot, and 18% of all registered Republicans have a ballot. Getting those in is kind of the key, but you got to cross thresholds before you start talking a little bit bigger. There's a number of us that would love to do all mail ballots with limited polling sites open, but that's a discussion for the legislature to do. It's nothing that I believe Secretary Pate can do on his own, or the auditors can do on their own. But I think that'll be discussed as we move forward, whether this COVID-19 continues down the path we're going, or if it gets better. I still think we'll be talking about that in the future.
Right. To me, the big number in this primary, well, how many ballots will we get back? Normally in Dallas, we're in the 90 to 95 percentile of ballots back. I'd really like to see that this time too, see those voters not only request, but are engaged and get them back to us.
So Jamie, you mentioned the legislature and they announced this week they are going back. Were there any requests perhaps from the Secretary's office or others already pending in the legislature? And if so, do you see any of those going anywhere at this point, or are they things that might be able to hold off until next year? Obviously, the rest of 2020 is still a lot up in the air, but would be curious about any legislative proposals that you're all considering at this time.
Well, what I feel is that they're going to come in, pass the budget, and get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to stick around and do a lot of non-budgetary work. I could be wrong. We always have, as an Auditor Association, we always have a number of proposals. Some get taken up, some don't. But they're dealing with the new normal too at the legislature. So I'm guessing that they're going to come in, pass the budget, maybe do the match for Secretary Pate, and then just move on. Maybe he sees it differently.
Well, I think you're right. I think they're focused on is getting those budgets done, because if not, the government's going to come to a grinding halt. Not looking at a lot of things coming their way. We don't have a list per se, a long list of things we're asking for, because we recognize that we're under a unique situation here. I think in fairness, what we'd like to ask the legislature is just to kind of give us a chance to get through this primary and start planning for the fall election, obviously. But when it's all done, when they come back in next January, we'll have much better numbers, more details, things like that, that they can look at, see how we handled this particular crisis. And if there's some fine tuning to the process, they'll have a chance to debate those points. Otherwise, I think we recognize that they're limited on how much they can debate and handle in the less than a month they'll have before the new fiscal year.
Thank you. So I maybe have another question I'll toss out, and then I see we have another audience question. You all in your roles do more than just elections. While we have you, are there things that you would want to mention to kind of our audience, and since we'll be sharing this after today as well, that you would want to tell individuals to be keeping in mind, particularly in this pandemic we're all experiencing, that other work that you're doing outside of elections, despite the fact that that's our topic today?
I would just I'm sorry, I just underscore that for your members, I think remote notarization has been an issue that the Iowa Bar Association, the realtors and the bankers and a lot of other folks have been involved with this past legislative session. They passed legislation on that topic. The rules were put into a place for an emergency basis because with this pandemic, how are we going to notarize documents? It was extremely challenging. So those rules will be formally handled here come July.
Can't take the call right now.
What's that? I thought somebody was talking. We are, so I think that remote notarization is something for those of you, please don't hesitate to look at our website to get more information on that. And it's real simple. You just go to the SOS website and you can learn more about it. But it's a new way to do business, and frankly, it's here to stay, and it's going to help, I think, a lot of folks who are trying to deal with out-of-state ventures as well, or internationally, for that matter.
Thank you. Julia, Jamie, anything else that you're focused on outside of the elections right now?
Real estate never ends in Dallas County. Growth is happening. Houses are being built, and deeds are coming through, and a lot of subdivisions continue to come through. So I'm just keeping everything moving while people are working at home.
Similar in Polk County, we're actually, like Julia, getting a new tax system on top of the constant,
That's right.
deeds coming in, questions coming in. And we're also transitioned to a very skeleton crew. In Polk County, other than the election office, the buildings are closed to the public. So we're moving more stuff online. And we're transitioning to a workforce that's not your typical government. You come in, everyone that works there is sitting down. So we're transitioning to that. It's been a little bit more difficult, but it's hard when your election office is here every day. We've never left, and the other parts of your office are able to work from home. So at some point, we're going to have a discussion about, can we keep doing this, or do we need to bring people back? And so that's the next thing we're going to work on in Polk County.
Thank you. So one of our next question from the audience, Art Whitmack, thanks for joining us, Art. I think it's always good to provide a little context, and Art leads the Taxpayers Association of Central Iowa. He asked, individuals are becoming more comfortable using the internet. Is voting using the internet in the future? Who wants to start?
I'll jump in. I don't think so. There's been some trial places that have done it. Hawaii, most notably, a couple cities did it a number of years ago. It is becoming more commonplace to use internet, but you start getting the haves and have-nots. So you have somebody that doesn't have one, say they're in the pandemic right now, and the libraries aren't open, schools aren't open. So I don't think we're going to get to that point. I think we always kind of tinker around the edges of how we run elections, but I think in Iowa we have a pretty good system. If you want to vote from home, you have this, thanks Secretary Pate, you have 40 days again. If you want to go to the polling site, great. You can do that. If you want to come to our office or go to a satellite site for the general election, which those may or may not be happening with COVID. But that's the opportunity we have in Iowa. But I don't think we're going to move to internet. The Iowa legislature moves pretty slowly with a lot of technological advances. We're still not able to take requests online. And that's something that, it just, people scan their stuff in. We need the wet signature to be able to count your vote. So I would say they'd be a little more hesitant to the internet, but maybe Julia or Paul have a different idea.
I agree with you, Jamie.
I would just point out that we're still working through cybersecurity issues in this country. That was the topic of the hour for the last almost 4 years. And with that kind of an issue out there, we've got to make sure that the voters have full confidence in whatever process we use in our elections. And that would probably be a big reason why you won't see the internet for right now, just because of that alone. And the fact that, as was pointed out by Jamie, change doesn't come real quickly in elections. There are many people out there who still feel very strongly they'd like paper ballots. In Iowa, we've made it clear here, at least our voters have, they like to have choices. They like to know they can, get that paper ballot and cast it at the polling location, or they can do curbside voting, or they can go vote at the auditor's office, or they can vote via the mail. We're one of the highest states in the country when it comes to voter participation. And I think a lot of it's because we offer our voters choices, and the internet one is probably quite a long ways out. I can tell you back when my first term as secretary back in, let's see, I do my math backwards, 94, there was discussion then about voting with your telephones. And they experimented with that a little bit, and it kind of went to the wayside. So we'll always be looking, but I don't think the internet's going to be here very soon on that sense. But we do online voter registration, and we do other things online, so we are helping people with getting their services. As Jamie's talked about his office and transition, we've been doing that for some time now. And during this particular pandemic, we've been able to do almost everything any business would want for filings online, 24 hours, 7 days a week. That's the way customers want it, and the government is responding to that. So on that side of it, the internet does play a big role.
Thank you for that insight. We have another question here about recounts, and the question, word for word, is voter fraud or tightly contested races where an individual may or may not win the race request a recount? Is that a concern with a larger percentage of mail-in ballots, or can you just talk about what you might see differently as the ballot numbers have increased this time?
I'll start. One, we've done recounts over the years. We've done them for tie votes, one vote. I mean, as auditor, I've probably done a couple dozen in my term in the office when I worked for Mike Morrow and now. And, that's why you test everything. That's why you have public tests. In terms of, tightly contested and large percentage of mail ballots, we have post-election audits. So it's one of those things where I'm confident in our system. I'm confident in my 98 other colleagues. I'm confident in the Secretary of State that voter fraud on absentees, your absentee can't be forwarded. So if Paul moved from Marion to Des Moines and he got a ballot in Marion and he already moved, his ballot won't forward. So there are things that are safeguards, but I'm proud of our system. The difference this time is we're not used to big turnout for primaries. This is going to be run like about the general election. And up until a couple days ago, our 2016 presidential numbers for requests we only had 4,000 less requests on Tuesday for the primary than we did for the 2016 presidential election at the same point in time. And that was with 40 days early voting. Now, obviously, people aren't going to be voting at satellites, and the numbers aren't going to ferret out that way, but it's just going to be a different type of election. And we're confident how we run our elections. I'm confident how Julia runs it. I'm confident how Paul oversees it. So I have no concerns at all.
I think we've got a lot of checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
I have confidence too, as Jamie's mentioned. The post-election audits are a big step that we added. The fact that we try to make sure all the counties are following basically the same guidelines, so it's apples to apples, particularly when you have elections that are cross county lines. So again, I'm very confident in it, but it's beyond what we think. We know we have to make sure you, the voters, are confident in how we're doing it, and that is why we work overtime in many cases to reassure you and provide as much transparency as we can. Good example is when you request a ballot absentee, you can track that online. Mm-hmm. So you know when the county auditor received your request, you'll know when the auditor mailed it out, and you'll know when they get your ballot back. That's transparency, I think, and reassure you, the voter, that your vote is getting counted.
Right. Absentees will be counted on election day, and we have our our board that comes in and counts them, and custody logs and checks and balances, both with staff and with the board. I am very confident that the 99 counties will be handling it the same.
Excellent, thank you. So I don't have any more questions from the participant. I thought I would just have us wrap up with a little bit of a two-part question. One is if there is one thing you want voters to remember leading up to June 2nd, what would that be? And then also if you have just any closing comments that you might want to provide to the group, or anything we didn't touch on that you want to mention. Who wants to start?
I can go first. I just want people to remember that we're working for the safety of everyone, and we just need to be patient as we take our steps forward, how we're handling things and how the precinct election officials will be able to handle those precincts. We need voters to be patient and thoughtful.
And I don't want to steal Paul's thunder, but you know, we want people to vote from home, the comfort of their home, but we also want them to be kind. You know, these poll workers, we have 44
Yes.
classes going on. Even though the governor allowed us to not have to socially distance, we have 44 classes of 8 people. And that's a lot of work for our staff. So these poll workers are going through it. We have a whole section on how to use the PPE.
Mm-hmm.
It does us no good if you're putting the mask on wrong, if you're not covering your nose, if you're not covering with a face shield. So we're doing things a little differently. And the one thing we'd ask you to do is just be kind. We're all trying to help you vote. There is no nefarious plan out there. We just want you to participate.
Thank you.
I want to thank the panel, Andrea, Ryan, everybody who helped put this together, and Jamie, of course, and Julia for being part of this. Dittos in the sense that really what we're doing here is just making sure it should be a normal process as much as we can make it under these particular situation. We want to assure you get the vote. We want to have the safest environment to have that accomplished. And that's what the election professionals like our county auditors and our office is working on every day. So you can have that. And patience is important. And I also am reminding my friends in the media and that don't be sitting there at 9:05 expecting to have all these results on your TV screen or on your telephone as you're looking up onto the social media side. We'll get them to you as quickly as we can, but accuracy is far more important, in my opinion, than the speed of getting it in your hands. Because of the high turnout we've had on absentees, it's going to take a little more time to count some of these ballots. And because of the consolidation of voting sites, we may see some challenges we're working through on that day. Those are the things we ask for your patience and understanding. And we ask you to practice safe distancing. And for those of you who aren't big fans of masks, I'm going to reach out to you and say you need to respect others as you come to the voting place and wear your mask. If you can hold your own personal judgment for it, but I need you to help others feel comfortable when they're at the polling site as well, because everybody's out there trying to get this job done. I'm very pleased to see that Iowans are stepping up at all levels, whether it's the poll workers, whether it's the voters. Iowans take voting and elections very seriously, and I'm proud to be the Secretary of State in one of the greatest states when it comes to voter participation. So thank you all for your time, and we will keep you up to date on as much of this information is out there. And don't be shy about going to your county auditor's website, or you can go to voterreadyiowa.gov, and it has basically all the answers to your questions you can look to for your election. Make sure you know where your voting site is, as has been mentioned by the 2 auditors here. You know, we're consolidating. You need to know what site you should be going to. We don't want to have you driving around looking. So those are some of the tips, and look forward to seeing everybody voting either early or on June 2nd.
Thank you. I don't think we could have wrapped that up any better. So thank you, Secretary. Just want to thank you, Julia, Jamie, all for joining us today. We are do put out the recording of this, and we'll make sure to share all that great information that was shared. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to get them to Ryan and I, and we'll get those answered for you. And I don't know that I have anything else. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Thursdays. And most importantly, if you choose to, don't forget to vote and to get your ballot in if you have one. I put mine in the mail last week. So
Awesome.
thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
guys.
Thanks.